Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight, my guest is Grant Cameron. He is an author, lecturer, and researcher who has been involved with ufology since 1975 after his personal sightings. He has made over 20 trips to the National Archives and most of the various presidential archives looking for presidential UFO material, and has a collection of every UFO document released by presidential libraries. Most of his research can be found at presidentialufo.com. Mr. Cameron, welcome, and how are you doing tonight?
Just fine, Chris. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate your interest in what I'm doing.
I've been looking forward to tonight. We live in fascinating times. We're seeing things we've never seen before, like the mainstream media openly discussing UFOs. We're seeing leaks from the government. We're seeing rock stars teaming up with the military-industrial complex. And we're seeing a revealing of our hidden world like we've never seen before. And it seems to be coinciding with an awakening and a rising of our consciousness. And I can't wait to get to all of this. But first, like I do with all my first-time guests, I'd like to know what got you started with everything. And I understand at some point you had a shift in consciousness in the way you look at the phenomena.
Yeah. So basically, the way it starts, I'm at university, not interested in UFOs, can't even think of ever having thought about extraterrestrial life or anything like that. I was interested in near-death studies. I had done a paper on events surrounding people's death. Like, do people ever get up and walk away? Miracles. Does anybody ever come to greet people before they die? Does anybody ever predict their death? Did anybody ever near-death experience? And this is back in the 1970s. This is when near-death experiences actually got going with the first book, I think, in 1975. So I was doing that kind of stuff. So I was into weird stuff. And I was a follower of Edgar Cayce, but the only reason I actually got involved in the UFO thing, and I would say that's my entire UFO career, is I got dragged down one rabbit hole after another that I didn't intend to go. It's like almost like somebody's sort of dragging me from one rabbit hole to another. So what happens is there's a small town called Carmen, Manitoba. I live right in the middle of Canada above North Dakota, and there's a small town. Carmen is having all these sightings, and it's a big story. And I live in Winnipeg, which is a city of about 700,000 people. And this thing is being seen, almost every night, and it's a big story. And I said to my friend, this is February of 1975, I said, we should drive around the city. I said, well, instead of driving around the city, why don't we go out to Carmen and see what everybody's looking at? I had no interest in UFOs. I just wanted to see, what's the deal here? It's in the paper, and let's go see what everybody's looking at. So we didn't go. We didn't go for 3 months, and we didn't go till May, just after the Vietnam War ended, a couple of weeks after the end of the Vietnam War. And what happened was the local TV studio, I won't get into the whole detail of the story, but basically catches this thing on the ground and catches it, and it jumps off the ground, and it's caught on TV camera, and it flies across the sky and stuff. So when that happened, and later, 35 years later, I came to believe that was not a random event. That was, I think, maybe even to get me out there. So this event takes place, and then I said to my friend, come on, let's go. Let's go see what they're looking at. So we drive out that night, and it's middle of May 1975. We drive into town, out of the town, into town, and we're looking at the sky, and I'm not into astronomy. I still don't really know stars and, constellations and stuff. We're looking at the sky, and we're basically looking and asking, what are they looking at? And we see Venus setting, and we see, the North Star, and we see all this stuff, and we're going, is that what they're looking at? What's everybody looking at? And so we did this for about an hour, and then what happened is my friend Larry, who I just actually had coffee this morning, I've known the guy for 60 years, and I have coffee with him every Saturday morning, and he went on with his life. But so anyway, Larry's driving, and I'm in the passenger seat, and there's one other guy in the back seat, and we're driving in the town. And so after an hour, we didn't know what everybody's looking at. Nothing impressed us. So Larry says, okay, well, let's drive back in the town one more time, and if we don't see anything, let's go home. I said, fantastic. It's been a total waste of time. We turned the car around to go back in town, and just as we turned the car on the road heading back west into this town, it appeared from the left to the right, and everybody in the car, because we were looking at things. Is that what they're looking at? Is that all this kind of questioning. When it appeared, nobody said, Is that what they're looking at? I wonder if that's what it is. Everybody just went, there it is. It was just so bizarre. It was like, we immediately knew this is what people were talking about. And it flew. It was very low. Hard to tell at night because it was pitch black. Hard to tell the size, but you know, it was pretty low, a couple 100 feet off the ground, flying right in front of the car from left to right, coming from the south, from the American border area, going north. And it was bobbing up and down. It wasn't sort of flying in a straight line. It was sort of bobbing like a fish, like a bobber on a fishing line, where it's sort of moving up and down in the water. It was like that. It was sort of moving. And it was a red plasma object. It was extremely bright, but you couldn't see the shape of it. You could tell it was longer than it was high, but because this plasma was so intense, you couldn't see the shape of the object. So as it came, we go, whoa, there it is. And it flew right in front of the car, down low. And it wasn't a light in the sky. It was an object. It was in pretty close. And I mean, I just like fell off the edge of the earth. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I was actually getting out of the car before the car had stopped. We were pulling off, because there was a set of school buses that were parked outside the town. We were about a mile out of the town. And I knew I was going to go in behind these school buses because it was so low. And I wanted to see this thing. So the car's still moving. I'm getting out of the car to run through the ditch to go across this parking lot so I can stand where these buses are and watch this thing as it flies off. And it just sort of, you know, it was this slow pulsing object that just flew off into the northeast, like it wasn't doing anything. It's just like we used to make a joke. It was burning gas. It was just flying along. It wasn't going anywhere, doing anything. So I dragged all my friends out there 2 nights later, and I'm just like absolutely hyped. I'm just like, you got to see this. It's the most amazing thing you've ever seen in your life. Drag all my friends out there, and there was a lot of people. There was a lot of people from the town, the city, that were out there trying to see this thing. And so the second night, all my friends go home after an hour. They said, I can still remember, Cameron, we're going back to Winnipeg. We're hungry. We're going for pizza. And I go, oh my goodness. And so they all pile out. There's about 28 people the second night on this road, and there was people all over the place. So on our road, there's about 28 people. My friends all take off. When this thing finally comes, which is not long after my friends left, maybe 15, 20 minutes after my friends left, this time it was a little bit different. It was like a flashing. There's some kids I interviewed later on that called it the bouncing ping pong ball. And when they said that, I said, oh, yeah, I've seen that. I know what you're talking about. And it would like bounce in the sky. It was like 8 inches in the field of vision. It was like a flash cube. And it would flash, 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 and it's moving around. And one kid is in the field. They're sitting there waiting. I've dragged all these kids out there to see this thing. And they said, is that what it is? I'm going, I guess so. I mean, it didn't look like what I saw the first night. But it was jumping around. I remember the guy, there was a car beside us, and the guy was basically unloading the camera. He had this, where motor drives back in 1975 where we advanced the film automatically. And they'd just come out then. So it was like you could hit this click, zzz, click, zzz, click, zzz, as he's unloading the camera as this thing is coming towards us. And it was flying right at us. And as it came closer, these flashes got closer together. And then there was a girl that was crying. She couldn't see the thing because it was jumping around the sky. She said, I can't see it. And she's crying. There was people swearing and screaming. And it was just like a football game. It was unbelievable. And it came towards us. And then the flashes got closer together. And then suddenly it reappeared as this object I'd seen the first night, this red plasma object. Sort of a slight green glow on the backside of it. And it was coming right at us the second night. It was down low again, just off the ground. And I was just amazed. And it made this turn, made a left-hand turn. And again, it just sort of flew off into the northeast like it was burning gas. It just flew off, doing nothing. And at that point, then I'm thinking to myself, like, oh my God. So I'm watching this thing fly away. I'm thinking, wow, that could actually be from another planet. I was just like, whoa, it's just consumed by this thing. So anyway, to make a long story short, I run around, all my friends go on with their life. I took people on tours out there. And at the end, I just basically said, okay, here's where you go. Because these things started to appear on the ground. I would write these maps. I'd seen enough. And a lot of people want to go and skywatch. I have no interest whatsoever. I mean, I saw a lot of stuff and I'm just not interested. So I would make maps for people. Here's where you go if you want to see these lights on the ground. And good luck, I'm not going, because there's really nothing you could learn except to sit there and look at it. And yeah, it's pretty weird. So I interview, the story was half the people in the town had seen it, based upon a poll I'd taken in the high school, maybe more than half, 59%, I think, in the high school. And I interviewed everybody. And then that's when I got my wake-up call. I tried to publish the manuscript, and nobody would give me the time of day. And the local publisher in this city of 700,000, who should have published it, because it was a big story, said, Mr. Cameron, you may believe in this kind of stuff. Count me among the unbelievers. And from that day on, I've never done sightings. I said, this is a total waste of time. I can tell you and I had some pretty bizarre sightings. I was close enough one time to jump on the thing, but you know, so I can tell you my stories, and you go, well, it's kind of cool, you know, like, but it doesn't really prove anything. It doesn't get you anywhere. So I gave up on the sightings. I said, I can't believe this. I mean, they wouldn't publish this book. So then all I was interested in is as that thing the second night, as it flew away from me, and I'm looking at him going, well, man, it could be from another planet. I'm going, what the heck is going on here? What is that thing? Because there was no doubt it was there. And so all I was interested from 1975 on was to try to figure out what was that thing I saw. Somebody has to know what that thing was. I mean, I'm just an ordinary guy. There's got to be somebody who knows what's going on here. So I started to look for the highest level person I could find who might have the answers. That's why I went after the Canadian government. The Canadian government led to Dr. Eric Walker, who was the former president of Penn State University, who knew what was going on. We tried to get him to talk. He had 14 honorary doctorate degrees. He was the chairman of the Defense Science Board, co-developer of the homing torpedo, you know, assistant secretary of defense. But he knew what was going on. And so he led to his papers. We were looking for his papers after he died. And he had indicated he was going to leave some papers at the Truman Library. And when I got to the Truman Library, I'm looking for Walker's papers. But it was at that point I'm thinking, well, my goodness, you know, the president's he's the most powerful guy in the world. He's got to know what's going on here. So I started to ask at the Truman Library. I said, well, what do you got on UFOs? And they said, well, you know, we just got these, if you remember in 1952, the overflight of Washington, D.C., where the UFOs are flying over, and all these, they put the shoot down order. And all these telegrams start inundating the White House in terms of, you know, don't shoot the thing down. And so they had all these telegrams, but that's all they really had. And then so I'm thinking, that's kind of weird. And so the Eisenhower Library was only a couple hours down the road going west. And so I went to the Eisenhower Library, and they said they had 5 documents. And one was like a telegram. There was like 5 documents. I said, well, how many pages you got here? And he said 28 million. And I'm thinking, something's wrong here, man. 28 million pages, and they got 5 documents on UFOs. And that started this search where I went for years, decades. And I went to almost all the presidential libraries. I grabbed all the documents I could. I photographed them. And I got some big stuff like the Rockefeller Initiative documents and stuff like that. And still it wasn't getting anywhere because there really is nothing in the presidential libraries. You can go there and you can be through the documents, except in the Clinton library. Clinton's got a lot of stuff. But all the other libraries, there's nothing there. So I'm sort of spinning my wheels. It's 2012. And that's why I have this experience. You talked about this. Now I refer to it as a noetic experience. I used to call it a download experience, an enlightenment experience, but it's actually a noetic experience. And the definition of noetic is it's an idea that comes. It's not a left brain rational analytical idea. It's not like 2 + 2, you know, +3, you know, -1 × 6 divided by 3. It's not that kind of thing. It's basically something that appears in your head that you didn't figure it out. It just appeared there. And the prime example would be, you know, left brain music is, you know, practice, read the music, practice, read the music. And right brain music, when you've got this sort of part of the brain, the left brain shut off, is Paul McCartney wakes up in the middle of the night and he's got this song in his head and he goes, oh, that's pretty cool. And he runs to the piano and he records this song and it becomes the song Yesterday, which is, you know, one of the most produced songs of the 20th century. It's that kind of thing. It comes with absolute certainty, which is the thing that's really hard to explain to people. So I have this experience in February 26, 2012, and it's in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm watching Colin Andrews give a lecture on crop circles. And what happened was I wasn't interested in crop circles. I wasn't interested in being in the room. I daydreamed, which is one of the ways you shut down the left brain. I'm really not there. I'm just sort of, you know, tuning out, and everything shuts down, and I pick up the signal, and in it comes, and it basically says, this is all got to do with consciousness. That's what it's about. And it came with this absolute certainty. I said, I know how this works. It was like just, it happened almost instantaneously. And then I had a second experience, which was much more complex in about maybe 2016, 2017. I remember the exact place, the exact time, you know, and what happened, where I was standing on the street and stuff. But I'm not exactly sure what year it was, but it was about this time of year, very cold. I had to take my glove off to write, and I could feel it coming. And I knew it's coming. Something's coming. And I started to write this stuff down, and it went on for a couple of minutes, and then it stopped, put my glove back on, start walking again, and then it started to come again. So that basically sums up where I am. And so I've sort of moved the whole gamut. I've done the UFO thing. I did the government document thing. I got a message from an alien about music, the messages in the music. I'm not a music guy. So I got dragged down that rabbit hole, and I ended up writing a book on music with no background in music. And it's basically all these weird stories about musicians who get songs in dreams or spontaneous songs, how many musicians believe they've been abducted. And so I've done that, and I've spent some time working on Mount Shasta, the Mission Rama group, which I'm very fascinated with. And these people claim to be doing a really direct contact with the beings. I got a message from an alien there that dragged me into that thing. So that's basically what I'm at. But basically, I'd say what I'm working on right now is the theory of reality. I mean, what reality really is, that we've got everything all mixed up. That came from the second download experience that I got, that people, it's like William James said, people think that they're rationally analyzing stuff, and all they're really doing is shuffling around their misconceptions and prejudices. So that basically sums up my whole career. Nothing I really intended to do, just sort of get into one rabbit hole after another. And it's been an exciting life. As I say, I believe this is a Super Bowl of all stories. If you understand what's going on here, you realize that you are playing in the biggest story of all times, if you understand the underlying implications of what's actually going on.
Yeah, and right now there's so much happening, so much being revealed, a lot of stuff that I never thought I'd see before, especially with the media talking about it. There's, Tom DeLonge teaming with up with the Army. All this strangeness. What do you think is actually going on? Is this a slow drip disclosure? Is it preparation? Is it disinformation? Or is it all of the above?
No, it's a slow drip. I wrote about this first in 1989, and the same guys that are involved now, whether you're talking Hal Puthoff, Kit Green, John Alexander, all these guys, they were known as the Averys. And I wrote about them first in 1989, 1990, when we were chasing Dr. Eric Walker around. And I said, watch these guys. Now everybody's suddenly found Jesus, and they're all excited about these guys. I've been talking about these guys for 30 years. And I said, you may not want to believe these guys, but listen to these guys. These guys know Ron Pandolfi, all these guys. They're all in this thing. And they are basically a group of people who are either military, intelligence, or former government people who at one point during their career either had a UFO experience, like they're experiencers. For example, Jim Semivan is an experiencer. He had the beings in his room. Gary Nolan is an experiencer. He had the beings in his room. Or you're somebody who's had a sighting like Dr. Eric Davis, who had a very dramatic UFO sighting on the day when he was graduating with his PhD, or Jack Sarfati, who gets a phone call from a computer on a spaceship. So a lot of it's that kind of stuff. Or it's the fact that you ran up against it, like Kit Green, where you run up against the phenomena in your job and you need to know more. Same as you and I. I mean, it's fine to say, I know this, but everybody wants to know more. So they're trying to figure it out, and they're trying to get to the bottom of it. So I say they're all just ordinary people who have connections with the government or with intelligence. And what they do is they basically talk among each other. So whenever there's an opportunity for intelligence or for information or money. So basically you have all of them were involved with Bill Moore in the 1980s. So Bill Moore had these contacts with the government, and they all realized Bill Moore's got these contacts. Let's talk to Bill Moore. What are you finding out? And then John Alexander comes along in 1985, and he has the Advanced Physics Theoretical Working Group, and they all appear there because they're all trying to interact with each other. They're trying to figure this thing out. And then Joe Firmich comes along in the 1990s, along with Bob Bigelow, who is interested in UFOs, but he's also interested in near-death studies. That was basically how NID started. It really wasn't UFOs. He's interested in consciousness. And so they realized Bigelow's got money. He's paying people thousands of dollars a day as a consultant. And so let's go. Let's go. Why wouldn't you not? Why would these guys not? And they would interact, and all the same guys would be picked. Kit Green, Al Puthoff, all these guys, and they all end up with Bigelow, and they all end up with Firmage, and then Firmage runs out of money, and Bigelow shuts down NIDS, and then they end up with Tom DeLonge. And I maintain Tom DeLonge is exactly the same story as Bill Moore. It's identical story. It is basically what I wrote it up in a book called Managing Magic, which appeared 8 months before Tom DeLonge's To the Stars was ever announced. I was talking about it. Everybody ignored it. People are still ignoring it. And I said 8 months before, I said, this is what they're doing. And basically, if you listen to, the key interview you got to listen to is an interview that Tom DeLonge did with Jimmy Church in 2016, where he basically talks about how he got into this thing. So people have Tom DeLonge, he's this guy, he's the Messiah, he's going to lead us to the promised land, and he's, he got this group all together, and he's a real smart guy, and he may be a real smart guy, but I can guarantee you I know how it started, and he tells that story in this Jimmy Church interview of 2016. He has a friend who has got a connection with working for Lockheed Skunk Works, and they know that Tom's really interested in this kind of stuff. And they invite him to the Lockheed party in the parking lot and ask him, do you want to introduce the president? So Tom DeLonge says, okay, I'll introduce the president as long as I get 5 minutes with the guy. And he ends up in a Lockheed skiff after he does his bit. They put him in a Lockheed skiff. He meets with the head scientist and with another guy. And then later on, Robert Weiss, the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, comes in, and they have this discussion. And Tom makes his pitch. You guys aren't getting anywhere. Your information may be good, but the young people aren't listening to you. You need me. I've got all these Twitter followers and Facebook followers, and I've got this and that, and I can get your message out. And at one point, if you listen to the interview, the one guy says, this might actually just work. And so they talk to him, and they set up the meeting. I don't care make up all the stories you want about how it started. The actual story is told by Tom DeLonge himself. They said, we'll get back to you. And he gets a email or a phone call, I think it's an email 2 weeks later, and says, you are to meet outside the Pentagon. And he goes there, and there's 2 intelligence guys sitting in a room, and they say to him, things like this do not happen in the White House. They do not happen in Congress. They happen when guys like us people like us decide to move the football down the field. So he meets these 2 intelligence guys. He didn't set it up. They set it up. Then those intelligence guys send him to NASA. So Tom DeLonge did not set up NASA. They set it up for him. And then he's there, and they send him to Ames, and he's at Ames, and they send him to the general. And then the general starts giving him all the rest of these people. So Tom DeLonge may have discovered the first guy from Lockheed, but all the rest of the stuff was set up for him. And so this group was formed around him. And in the conversation that my friend Melinda Leslie had with Jim Semivan, I knew this interview was going to take place. So she said, what do you want to know about, what do you want to ask Jim Semivan? I said, I only got 2 questions. Is this constitutional? Is this legal and constitutional what To the Stars is doing? Or is this a rogue operation where people are running around with leaked documents or whatever? And in connection with that, is this thing green lighted from the Pentagon? So that's basically all I want to know. Is this a legal operation that the Pentagon is running, like Bill Moore, like all the operations before where they leak this material to Bill Moore? Or is this a rogue thing where people are running off with classified documents and should be sitting in jail? And basically, according to Melinda Leslie, she's asked it to Jim Semivan twice, and Jim Semivan is the co-director of To the Stars. And he said, well, of course it's being green-lighted by the Pentagon. And as much as I can try to tell people that, nobody catches on. They still think, well, the government really doesn't know what's going on. Lou Elizondo got these videos out. And I say, come on. When you resign in disgust from the Defense Department, they don't give you the videos for a goodbye present. Videos, when you get the videos out, someone's letting the videos out. There's thousands of videos. They're probably all unclassified. That's how they sort of protect them. But so this is an operation. I don't care what they say. This is an operation. It's a slow drip thing where they're leaking it out. But the guys that are in it are legitimate players. And they are guys who are, for whatever interest, they may have a patent. They want to get a patent, or they have a security clearance they have to protect, or they're just really interested. But I don't believe it's bad guys. I've known a lot of these guys for many years, and they're just curious guys like you and I. They're just different from you and I in that they have security clearances, and they've seen some stuff you and I haven't seen. And that's why I say it's very important to listen to them. So when Eric Davis says they shut down the crash saucer recovery program in 1989, I say listen to Eric Davis. He's got a security clearance. He's former intelligence with the U.S. Air Force. He's really interested in the subject, and I think you should be listening to those people, which people don't. They want to sort of pick and choose what they've got. But so it's a slow drip disclosure. They've done it over and over again. And so when I saw the Tom DeLonge thing, and I think it's in the book, I just said, oh no, they're doing it again. I mean, they're doing the same thing, and it's exactly. And what you get is a guy who believes he's a messiah. So I named a couple of these guys as messiahs. Stephen Greer believes all these got 1,000 witnesses leaking in material. And it's like, you have not got the money to vet these people. They can put in bad witnesses. All they're doing is throwing mud in the water. And they're feeding material to Stephen Greer because he believes he's the Messiah. He's here to bring people disclosure. Tom DeLonge thinks he's here. He even talks about his name. His name is the truth bringer or something like that. If his Thomas, whatever his middle name is, Michael or whatever. He talked about it one time. So these people believe the same as Bill Moore. I remember Bill Moore. I dealt with him in the 1980s when the MJ-12 document was being released and all these kind of documents. And I knew Bill. And I remember when he finally pulled out, he was shattered. His ego was shattered when people wouldn't listen to him. He wasn't the big kahuna anymore because of everybody was accusing him of hoaxing these documents. And so he left the field, and I went to interview him at the very end. And I said, can I do an interview? He said, look, Grant, we've been friends, but here's the situation. I didn't figure this thing out. You're never going to figure it out. Give it up. And so he walked away. He figured, I'm the only guy that can figure this thing out. And that's how they set up Bill Moore. They said, you're the only guy that knows what you're talking about. Two guys approached him right after he wrote the Roswell book. So what you do is you have people who can get the message out, like Tom DeLonge, can get the message out to people, or Bill Moore. Bill Moore, people don't realize. He wrote the book, the first Roswell book. The Roswell incident, which made millions. It was sold millions of copies. It was a huge book. And he was the first sort of guy that was legitimate, actually had some witnesses, because before 1980, there was nobody talking about crash saucers. People don't realize. I mean, there was no discussion about that at all. It was totally new. And he had these witnesses on the ground and intelligence people. And so they set him up, and he could carry the message, and he did carry the message. And they've done it over and over again. So it's the same scenario all the time. So the material you're getting is accurate, and what they do is they protect the material by changing the documents. So you're not leaking legitimate documents, because if you do, you end up in jail for like 5 years for like one-page document or whatever. You can't leak legitimate documents. So what I believe that they often do is you change or alter the document, even one period, and then you can say the document's a hoax. No, it's not a real document, because you've altered the document. So they're controlling it. It's a gradual release. And as Jim Semivan says, of course it's being green-lighted by the Pentagon. This is not coming up by accident. They sort of want it out. And to finish this sort of thought, which now I've changed in the last year, I would think that you may have actually seen disclosure. I have come to conclusion after many, many years, 4 decades plus at this thing, I really don't think they know anything. I really don't. And the prime example that you can take is there's a debate that sometimes you get in these email chains. There's a debate between physicists who are talking about the tic-tac and how do you fly the tic-tac and what's the stuff. And it's all mathematical stuff, and they're fighting. And Eric Davis is fighting with Jacques Sarfati. And you have Brian Josephson, who won the Nobel Prize for superconductivity and quantum tunneling and stuff like that. So it's a high-level list, and basically what they're doing is if you remember this piece that now has sort of been discounted, this layered piece of metal with the bismuth magnesium piece, and they're talking about levitating this piece, and they're fighting about who knows how to do it, and they're saying, no, you're wrong, I'm right, and stuff. And I remember having a conversation with Eric Davis, and he believed that Sarfati was right. And I said, you know what? It really doesn't matter who is right. Basically, if two top-level guys, and physics is a very small world. I mean, high-level physicists, they all know each other. It's not like there's thousands of physicists, high-level guys that nobody knows who they are. They all know each other. And if these two guys, high-level physicists, are arguing about levitating some little 2-ounce piece of metal off the table, we ain't got nothing. I mean, so a lot of the stuff that's out there, we're flying to other star systems and all this kind of stuff, is, I think, just military bravado. It's just stuff people want to put out. I think you may have seen disclosure. Yes, we have bodies. Yes, we have crafts on the ground. Yes, we've got videos. UFOs are real. It's coming from somewhere else. But beyond that, really nothing. And I'll give you an example of that. Kit Green had made a comment. This is on a board about 12 years ago. He said, Uncle, I guess referring to Uncle Sam, and the intelligence community are clueless. There's a meeting that took place in 1987. This is just before they supposedly shut down the crash saucer program. Jacques Vallee, Hal Puthoff, and Kit Green. Now, these are top-level guys. Hal Puthoff and Kit Green probably have maybe the longest-held top-secret SAI clearances in the United States. They've been going at this thing since 1969, and they had a meeting in Denny's restaurant, and they basically put out the question. There's a lot of weird stories going around, a lot of people making claims. What do we know for sure about the UFO phenomenon? You got to remember, these are 3 high-level people. And they're saying, what do we know for sure? And it became known as the core story. So what's the core story? What do we know for sure? And what they came up with, yes, we are being interacted by some sort of intelligence. We have crash material. There's been at least 1 crash. And the third thing was, we aren't getting anywhere. So basically, I'm sort of pulling away from the field in terms of saying that if you want to know this thing, you got to move towards consciousness. It's not as, I'd say it's going to be a lot less physical than people think it is. It's going to be a lot more spiritual than people think it is. People are not going to be happy about that. People want toys. They want free energy. They want, let's make some money out of this deal. Let's, bomb the Russians and the Chinese with this new inventions and stuff. I think it may be that basically, yeah, they know the Tic Tac was real. The videos are real. All that stuff is real. They've got bodies. They got crafts. But until you hear them start talking about consciousness as being the basis of this whole thing, I don't think they have anything. As long as they're talking nuts and bolts, they are completely on the wrong train, going the wrong way.
That's exactly what I was just going to ask you about, because, the more I research this, the more I look into it, I agree with you 100%. The nuts and bolts fall away. The physical aspect, it kind of goes away, and it becomes more of like an interdimensional type thing. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but consciousness seems to have a big part. It seems to be connected to all of this. Tell us a little bit more about what's your thoughts on what this phenomenon really is.
Well, I would think that you'd go to Jacques Vallee. Now, I remember Jacques Vallee, I used to think he was a crazy man. And now I'm basically saying Jacques Vallee is the guy you got to go to understand this. And he basically points out, which I've already known. I talk about patterns in ufology that the problem that some people have is that they think they get into the UFO field. They've been in it for 5 years or 10 years. And they think, this is the way it's been. It's always been this way. And I keep trying to impress upon people, you got to realize what happens now didn't happen even 10 years or 20 years ago. It's almost like the intelligence behind the phenomena is flipping the pages of a book, and it's changing. So if you go back 25 years ago, if you remember, Stanton Friedman used to talk about the trace cases where the UFO would land, burn the soil, and it would leave pod marks, 3 pod marks. That hasn't happened for 20 years at least. It stopped. I mean, it used to be the biggest thing going. They were landing all over the place. There was little guys running around with rods, and stuff like that outside the craft and stuff. That doesn't happen. There are no humanoid type cases outside of crafts anymore. That's all gone away. There was no crop circles until 1983. Before, it was all these landing trace cases. And if you go back, the prime example that illustrates this, where you get into the Jacques Vallee idea, and he goes into the fairy stuff, and this is all they're doing is using our understanding of the world, playing off that. So if you go back to 1890s, there was this huge flap of airship sightings in the Western United States, and it's like thousands of sightings. But the sightings, what were people seeing? They weren't seeing metal crafts with windows and little gray aliens looking out the windows and stuff like that. They were seeing wooden ships with propellers and guys hanging off ropes and stuff like that. That's what they were seeing. And you can see that it's almost like we're part of the manifestation of whatever we're into. So now we're into space, space travel and stuff. So they're playing it up like they're space travel. And so you see these crossovers, and that's where I got into this work on consciousness. Like I'm doing a book on what's called contact modalities, where I say it's all the same thing. And this is goes to the idea that whether it's channeling or mediumship or UFO abduction or all this kind of stuff, when you get to the bottom line of this thing, you start seeing these crossovers, that it's the same thing. It's just manifesting different, that people, whatever you have. And so people think that, this is part of my download. I won't give it into it, but the download I got was, is the world made out of nuts and bolts, or is it made out of consciousness? If it's made out of nuts and bolts, that's one world. If it's made out of consciousness, everything's going to change. All the rules change. If it's so we have this idea about separation. So it said, is everything separate? This is what we're taught. We're random biological robots in a random meaningless universe. We're just particles floating around, and the only time anything's going to happen is when we interact and hit against each other or talk to each other, something like that. There has to be near interaction, otherwise nothing's going to happen. So we believe in this thing of separation. It's me and you are separate, and that is, to me, the beginning of all evil is the belief in separation. So you have this separation idea. So we have the idea that the UFO is separate from us. And when you get to the oneness thing, so it's separation or is it oneness? If it's oneness, everything changes. So if you suddenly realize that you're part of what you're seeing, that there is no screen and there is no little speakers inside your head, that what you are seeing, everything you see goes through your consciousness, and you get into this really weird thing about what are we really seeing? Is it really physical? Is there time and space? And you start to realize that we've got it all sort of screwed up. We don't, and that maybe that's what they're basically teaching us, is moving us to that step of reality and realizing that it's not made out of nuts and bolts. It's not random. And I got this very long, involved noetic experience that sort of pointed this stuff out to me. But that's what people think. So we think that, the beings are an event, and we're the victim, and then we get grabbed upon the ship. And there's actually an interview that I recommend people watch, and it's a debate between Bud Hopkins and John Mack from Harvard. And this goes back many years. So they're at Boston, and they're having this debate. And at one point, John Mack says, Bud, and this is the thing, because John Mack had, his were all sort of, he saw it as a very spiritual enlightenment experience. And of course, Bud Hopkins said they were intruders. They should go leave us alone. It's a bad experience. There's nothing good about this experience and that sort of thing. So John Mack at one point says, Bud, it's really strange. He says, I'm the psychiatrist here. Now, I'm the psychiatrist. You'd think I'd be getting all the real bad, crazy ones. But actually, I'm getting all the spiritual enlightened people that are looking for enlightenment, and you're getting all the bad ones. And then he said, maybe, Bud, that has more to do with you and I than it does with the aliens. And that's this whole idea that we have to start to realize that maybe what we're seeing, we are in a way manifesting what we're seeing. And that's when you get in and you start looking at stuff like that. Then you start looking at people that have figured it out. For example, when Tom DeLonge goes in that skiff with Lockheed Skunk Works, just before Robert Weiss, the president, walks out, he's talking to the head scientist, and he's talking to another guy. So this head scientist is saying to him, okay, I just want to know, how's it work? How do these things operate? And Tom gives some guess. He doesn't say what it is. And the head scientist says, yeah, it's pretty good. Anything else? And then Tom says, I think consciousness is involved. And the head scientist says, now you're talking. And he said for 45 minutes, that's all the guy wanted to talk about was consciousness. So you can see, at least at Lockheed Skunk Works, the head scientist level, they have sort of figured this thing out. The other one is people have this idea that Bigelow is this, evil, guy who's got, these hangars, and they got flying saucers in there, all this crash material and whatever. And if you look at Jacques Vallee's latest book number 4, Forbidden Science, Volume 4, he talks about the beginning of NIDS, where the beginning of NIDS was, we're going to work on UFOs and we're going to work on life after death. And one of the scientists that was there at this first panel meeting said, what are we picking those subjects for? Like, why don't we just do ESP and Sasquatch? And he was really sort of upset that they're going to do this life after death thing. And Bigelow had his son die at a young age and his grandson die at a young age. And he was fascinated in this survival of death. And John Alexander, who has a degree in thanatology, a PhD in death studies, also talks about this, the fact that the ultimate mystery you got to figure is there life after death. That will solve all the mysteries because it's all tied in. It's all the same thing. And so what you see is Bigelow putting up $3.7 million to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas for consciousness studies. So you can see he figured it out. And that's where we're getting more and more people. The quantum physics people are starting to move in that direction, where you realize, that the particle can go through 2 slits at the same time. It goes, and once there's an observer, then it changes from a a wave to a particle, and all these weird sort of things. And that's basically, I think, I do a lecture called The Theory of Wow, where I basically look at the whole UFO phenomena, and I go after all the stuff, and I go through everything. I'll go through UFOs, cattle mutilations, crop circles. I go through the metals that they found and stuff like that. And I go, you know what? In the end, I think they're not doing anything. Like, if you look, there's nothing material about inside of a flying saucer. There is no leather couches. There are no chandeliers. There's no designer clothes. There's no jewelry. There's nothing. And you start looking at, like, so what are they really doing? And then you come to the conclusion. I call it the theory of wow, where all they really want you to do is go, wow, what's going on here? This is not making sense. And it's trying to break that materialistic paradigm. So the ultimate one is, why do UFOs have lights on them? So you can see them. We don't have lights on our craft. They have lights. John Lennon had big marquee light bulbs on it and a red light on the top. You don't need big light bulbs on the side of the flying saucer to fly through interstellar space. They have the lights so you can see them. The same as mine. It was this plasma thing, and it was like, wow, I'm just looking at this thing. And then you look at the metals. I even got a request now to provide some metal. I guess it's going back up through Vallee or whoever to the stars or whatever, about the Canadians. The Canadians were into this in the 1950s. And it's like the metal thing. And I'm going like, come on, folks. I mean, do you think that a flying saucer comes across the galaxy and then these little pieces start falling off the flying saucer? Come on, give your head a shake. They're not flying out. They're dropping this stuff. And I even asked Jacques Vallee. Not Jacques Vallee, I asked Hal Puthoff. I said, come on. I mean, you had this stuff in the lab in the 1970s when Uri Geller was there, when they're doing the remote viewing. This stuff is falling, apports and manifestations. Stuff is falling in the lab from outside the ceiling, and just this weird stuff going on. It's the same thing. I'm going like, the metal has got to be a port material. They just want you to go, wow. And then people say, well, we should analyze it. We should analyze this material. Well, where's that going to get you? The same way UFOs say, or videos get you. Is you establish, okay, the video is real. I don't think we made it. Okay, so where do we go from here? And people are always trying to reprove the UFO thing. So they want the metal. Like, let's prove it. Let's look at even the apports. I've got some of these apports, piles of these stories in the last year that I've gathered. And people say, well, we should have one of these apports analyzed. Maybe the isotopes will be all messed up. And it's like, yeah, maybe. So what? So what if it just means it's weird metal? And Kit Green will say, well, it could have been made in a super secret black lab. Or you could say it doesn't come from here. Okay, so where do we go from here now? That's what people are doing. They're trying to reprove the fact that UFOs are here. And I guess my advantage was that I had that right in my face in 1975. I don't have to prove they're here. I know I never went down that road of trying to reprove. But that's what 99% of the UFO community, that's what they're doing. They're trying to prove the UFO thing. So like, what do we need? We need this evidence. And so what? If we establish, for example, that it's real, the government stands up and says, okay, it's for real, which they have done. Say, okay, it's for real. Okay, so what happens? We all have a big party. We give each other high fives. We drink a couple of wobbly pops, have a good time. And tomorrow morning, you're getting up to go to work. It doesn't solve anything. What you have to do is establish, yes, it's for real, and go with that assumption and get to the next step. We've been doing the is it real thing since 1947. I knew immediately it was for real, so I was always on the next thing of like, okay, so where are they from and what are they doing? And that leads to the whole thing that I've maintained in the last couple of years, and I still haven't got most people don't believe me, is I say, if you want to know what the UFO phenomenon is all about, you assume that it's for real, and you talk to the people who are interacting with the phenomena. Forget about the videos, forget about the metal, forget about all that nonsense. It's for real. Now we got to get to what are they here for? And there is a whole lot of people who are actually interacting with the phenomena. And when you start to talk to those people, you start to see very direct patterns of what they're being told, what the important things are, why they're here. That's the only thing I'm interested in now, is the message, who these people are, what it is, what it's all about. And you cannot learn that from a photo. You cannot learn that from a piece of metal. You cannot do that by going out and sky watching. That's all just entertainment type stuff where, it's kind of cool. You see something fly by. It's like, wow, that's pretty cool. And it's almost like I go back to the analysis or the analogy that in the end of the the 19th century, what we were doing is we were basically doing the same sort of thing, except we were doing it with mediumship. So instead of, you know, sky watching, we'd bring in a medium and we'd levitate tables and we talk to dead people, you know, with Ouija boards and stuff like that. And it's just like entertainment. So you're rich people, you've got nothing better to do. You know, there's lousy TV, so let's talk about UFOs and look at UFO photos, and it's really cool and it's exciting, but it doesn't give you an answer. You have to talk to the experiencers, and the vast majority of the UFO community, I think, is still in the box where they say, well, it's just anecdotal. These people, they just believe they're on a flying saucer, and yeah, and you believe you're a physical being, and you believe that you have these beliefs and those beliefs. Yeah, it's all belief. I'll agree, it's all belief. But when you get these people, why would, if for example, 40% of all experiencers say at one point they knew the answer to everything in the universe, and 42% say they got mathematical, scientific, or technical material in their head that they didn't learn in school. And I've talked to a lot of the people in both groups. So if somebody says, at one point I knew the answer to everything in the universe, don't you think it behooves us to at least try to pick the lock and to figure out, is that true? And can we hack into that thing? And that all the information may be in a field, instead of doing the thing like, oh, let's go do a sky watch and let's, you know, see if something flies by. That's not getting us anywhere. You've got to talk to the people who are interacting with the phenomena.
Now, when you look at these personal experiences of people who have been abducted, who have had contact experiences, and they describe different beings, different races. Yeah. Is this just a projection of what they want us to see?
Sure. Well, we already know. We know for a fact, and that it's an absolute fact. I mean, if you've interviewed Mike Cleland, who's the owl guy, I mean, we know they can screen image anytime they want. I mean, I have a girl from Boulder. Every time I get on a rabbit hole meeting with her where there's a bunch of experiences there, I say, Candace, tell them the rabbit story. And she tells this story about, you know, going down this road and there's rabbits in the road and it takes an hour to go down this road and the rabbits in front of the car and stuff like that. And just this really bizarre story about this. It moves a couple feet and then she moves and it moves. And it's 2 o'clock in the morning. She's in Wyoming. She's a singer playing at a bar and all this kind of stuff. And then her boyfriend says, you know, Candace, I think you better be regressed. And of course, it wasn't a rabbit at all. And they'll appear as owls, they'll appear as deer, they'll appear as all sorts of stuff. Or you'll see them screen imaging inside the ship. They'll pick up a little kid and the kid freaks out and immediately they turn into doctors. And they can do this instantaneously. Instantaneously they can change into whatever it is. So they can appear as whatever they want. And if you've interviewed Sherry Wild, who's an experiencer, pretty major experiencer out of Wisconsin, she was dealing with a being by the name of Da, and she said to Da, she said, are you actually an alien? I mean, is that what you actually look like? And he said, no, not really. And then she said, well, why do you come and say this ugly looking gray thing? And then he said, ugly looking gray thing? Do you ever look in the mirror? He said, you got those big teeth. Every time you smile, we think you're going to eat us. You know. And so that kind of thing, where a lot of people have asked the alien, are you actually an alien? And the prime example that would show that it's not the physical thing you think it is, I have on my YouTube channel, I have an interview I did with Joseph Ronan out of Israel, and he talks about how the beings leave. And so the beings, he said, when they left his room, they gathered in a circle and they held hands and they started to move around in this circle, rotating in this circle. And they went faster and faster and faster and faster. And they turned into light. And then the ball of light got smaller and smaller and smaller and just went beep out there. So the question is, if you're believing in flesh and blood aliens, is it a flesh and blood alien or is it a ball of light? And if it's a ball of light, does it eat bacon, eggs, toast, and coffee in the morning? So you can see that these beings can come into the physical world. They can manifest as physical beings looking like whatever they want to look like. And then they go back into the field. We think that we're here. Nothing changes. Everything's physical, and consciousness is just an epiphenomenon of the brain. It really doesn't exist. It's just out there. It doesn't have any weight. It has no sort of thing. And what you're starting, and what my download experience says, if it's a physical world, yeah, that's one world. But if it's consciousness world, it's a completely different world. So if consciousness is basic, it's all made out of consciousness. It's all ooly stuff, as one quantum physicist said. So consciousness makes the physical world. And once you're in that field, if you're in that higher vibrating field or whatever that thing is that they're in, then you can come in here and you can move back. And the prime analogy of how I think the whole thing works is it's like an ocean. So we're in the ocean, and there's this expression, darkness is not a thing unto itself. Darkness is just the absence of light. So we're at the bottom of the ocean, and we are in the dark. We have, we think, and that this world we're in, we have flesh and blood and nuts and bolts and all this kind of stuff. And then from time to time, what'll happen is somebody will be able to channel, do mediumship, have an out-of-body experience, have an abduction experience, and suddenly they get moved up in the water and they come out of the darkness and they get closer to the light. And the closer you get to the light, the more you can see, the more answers you can get. So this is the whole idea, is that we're stuck down here. We think that everybody lives in the dark. There is nothing outside the dark. And it's just because we can't go up. But you can, and that's this idea that 40% of all experiencers say at one point they knew the answer to everything in the universe. So you can get up very high towards the light and you can see everything. So the beings are up in the higher level of the water. They can come down into the darkness where we are and then move back again. We just think we're stuck in the darkness here, and that it's all darkness. There's nothing outside the darkness. And that's the way we get, because that's the left brain ego says, I'm the center of the universe. If I'm not experiencing it, it doesn't experience. But you could have piles of people who have these experiences, especially the near-death experience or the encounter with the beings, and then you see the beings. If you've interviewed the guy who has the big catalog, he has 20,000 humanoid beings. So of course I went to him and I said, okay, so how many different alien types are there? And he said, well, I haven't really counted, but I would say there's got to be over 1,000, because you're going to get a lot of grays or reptilians and stuff like that. And the other thing is, so you have 1,000 different beings at least. And so the question is there 1,000 different, or are they manifesting? Because one of the patterns that people never bring up, that I always bring up, is the fact that you never get a person who's had an abduction experience, whatever you want to call it. I just call them experiencers, who's only seen one being. So they'll start with, tall, like Chris Bledsoe, tall, 7-foot, bluish green guys. They look like grays, except they're bluish green. And then he runs into this shining lady. And in every incident, the beings start to change. And you see all these beings sort of working together. And you're wondering, like, how you saw grays, and then you saw reptilians, and then you saw mantis people, and then you see human type people. And it's almost like all these people are working together, which would make sense. In the field, they're all working together. And that part of what it is what you're manifesting. And there's a famous Hollywood guy that was an experiencer told me that what he was told was, when they come in and they work inside your brain, they can only use what's inside your mind. So if you're in fear, they're going to use fear to teach you a lesson. If you're into love, they're going to use love to teach you a lesson. That they can't teach you stuff that isn't in your head. So people have to realize that you are part of what the experience is. So you even look at it in the idea, is there one life or is there multiple lives? So people think there's separation, and there's us, we're the good guys, and then there's evil aliens. And I always say, be careful what you wish for, because if it's multiple lives, what happens if you come back as the evil alien next time? Are you now evil for all eternity? And you got to realize, we are them and they are us. We are all one. And it's this reincarnation thing where everybody's playing this little game to learn lessons. And I firmly believe that the stuff that I've been given makes sense, but it also comes with this noetic quality where I was sort of given it. It's not something that I sort of figured out. Almost nothing that I figured out. I got dragged down, given messages, really weird sort of stuff. And I've just sort of followed the flow, so to speak. And I'll get very direct synchronicities when I get in a field. Like I just got into the apport thing, which I guess we can maybe talk about, apports and manifestations. When I didn't even know what the word meant. When I got it, I said, oh, I should check this. Maybe I'll check this thing out. And I check it, and I find out there's a collection of apports at the University of Manitoba where I worked for 37 years. It's that kind of synchronicity where you go, I think I better study this thing. This is pretty direct synchronicity in terms of what's the chances. There's only 2 collections in the whole world. One of them's at my university. And so I got into this whole thing about stuff that falls out of the sky, metals that fall, or coins, or stuff that reappears, some really bizarre stuff. Even like I give a presentation at Laughlin, Nevada, which was, I got my own experience. I mean, where they took my PowerPoint presentation, and I've done a lot of PowerPoint. I say I'm as good as anybody at doing PowerPoint. I've done it for 15 years. And they grabbed my PowerPoint presentation, 190 slides. They doubled up 40 slides, 30 to 40 slides. They made 4 slides disappear. They moved the audios from those 4 slides to other slides, which is impossible when you embed audio and video on the thing. What else did they do? Slides were out of order. It was just the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. And now even my original, when I went back, I'm doing a PowerPoint presentation. When I went back to look at the original, was still on my computer, which was pristine and perfect. Even that one now, when I turned the computer off and it came back on the Monday, I was going to review it. It's the same as the one that I downloaded onto the computer in Laughlin, Nevada at the conference hall. Just really bizarre when you see that kind of stuff where all the slides are distorted. It was just the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. And that's the kind of weird stuff I'm in now, where you start to wonder, like, why are they doing this? Like, why are they doing this weird stuff? And I think it comes down to this thing. They're just trying to raise consciousness by getting you to realize you are not the center of the universe. There is more to the world than this little physical thing you think is going on here. And they're just trying to awaken people to make them go, what the heck's going on here? Why is this happening? And the more people think about it, the more they see all this weird stuff, they realize there's something very significant, and we have got everything all mixed up as to how reality actually works.
Now, you recently got a hold of Stanton Friedman's files. I know there is a ton of stuff that you have to go through. So far, what are some of the, I guess, just a few of the more interesting things that you have come across?
Okay, so you should give people background on how big this collection is. There was 15 pallets. So we're talking 40 archives boxes on a pallet. There was 15 pallets plus the computer, which would have a lot of files on it, which is in addition to that. I photographed 6,000 pages. I went through 15 small archives boxes out of 22 that were available. There's the archivist, who is Joanna, who brought the collection to the provincial archives in Fredericton, New Brunswick, is now estimating 3 to 4 years to get this collection all put together. It's a lot of material, and most of it wasn't filed. So I went through the 15 boxes, and this is the stuff that he had in his collection that was in file folders, in filing cabinets. So the material I was looking for was this 1980 stuff from Bill Moore. So I'm looking for all the background conversations, because Stanton Friedman was famous for the MJ-12 document that was released in 1987. And the document is phony, no matter what anybody says, it's phony, but everything it's talking about is real. So that's what they do, is they put an idea out, they put it out through a fake document, everybody runs for cover, they say the document's a hoax, it's all disinformation, everybody runs, and the idea of MJ-12 gets out. So Stan worked on this, and so a lot of the collection has to do with his defense of that. And I was trying to get the conversations with Bill Moore as to what was going on behind the scenes. And I got some of it, but most of the stuff I haven't read, because I got so much material to do. Like, I'm doing the support thing. I got 7 books that are in final editing stages and stuff like that. So even though I got the 6,000 pages, it takes a long time to go through 6,000 pages when you're not really working on it, you're doing other stuff. So I've gone through maybe 300 pages, but I can tell you the highlights of what's going to be there. Stan was very much into the MJ-12 thing, so there's a lot of that. He spent a lot of time fighting with skeptics, so there's a lot of correspondence between Michael Shermer, the great Randy, Phil Klass, and Stan was arguing back and forth. And this is going by snail mail. This is not email. This is in the days when we had to do everything by letter, send a letter and wait for 2 weeks for an answer and stuff like that. So there was that. Then there was the Area 51, which is pretty interesting stuff. Stan was dead set against Bob Lazar as being a big fraud and stuff like that. I worked on it. I have a different opinion. I'm not going to get into it. I wrote it up in 2 different books. And George Knapp thought my version was pretty close to what he thought was going on. But anyway, so all the files from the Lazar thing are there. So all the court documents when he got the pandering charge in 91, all the stuff on his background and stuff like that. And most interesting, and I got to be sensitive about how I do it, but there was this correspondence going back and forth between George Knapp and Stan Friedman, because Stan Friedman was the big kahuna, and George Knapp was trying to convince him why he believed this kind of stuff. A lot of inside talk as to what was going on and stuff like that. And these were like letters, which were on both sides would be 3-4 page letters where they were detailing all the stuff. There's probably just the Knapp correspondence with Friedman has probably got to be 100, 200 pages. It's quite a bit of material. So I'm going to release all that material, the Area 51 stuff. The one document that I did find there that I was going for is I'm not sure if I put it up on the internet yet, but it has to do with the Cuban incident in 1967. I knew Stan had been involved with this back in the 80s. I'd heard that he was involved. So that was one of the things that luckily he had filed. So I when I talked to the archivist, I said, yeah, I want you to get his FBI file, and I'll talk about that in a sec, but I want this Cuban story. So basically what happens is in 1987, Stan gets a letter from he gets a phone call from a guy. I didn't see the, no, I saw Stan's letter back to him, but he didn't send a letter. He must have phoned. So anyway, this guy puts out this story, and here's the story. A naval facility in Florida is, part of its job was to monitor Cuban communications, air traffic communications. So they pick up one day, Cuban communication that there's a UFO coming into Cuban airspace. Now, remember, we knew this back in 87. We knew this story, what had happened. But I wanted to see what was in Stan's files as to what he really knew about it. So it's 87, this guy contacts. And basically what happens is they pick up the communication. They scramble 2 MiG-21 jets, and they intercept this thing as it comes into Cuban airspace. NSA, this naval facility, is listening in on this whole thing. And they ask it to identify itself. The craft does not identify itself. And then the pilot is given the instruction to lock on and take it down. So the pilot responds that he's locked on and he's about to fire. And then the communication has the back guy. So there's a guy in the front and a guy flying in behind him. And you hear the guy in the back start yelling and screaming, he's gone, he's gone. And the plane just poof, gone like that, just disintegrates as he's about to shoot the craft. And so they pick this up, and somehow I guess this guy leaked it to Stanton Friedman. So Stanton Friedman gave it to a guy by the name of Bob Pratt back in the day. Bob Pratt worked for the National Enquirer. He was a fantastic reporter. I did work with him. A lot of people did. National Enquirer had unlimited amounts of money. And this guy would do these investigations and provide us all the transcripts of the interviews and stuff. So they gave it to Bob Pratt. Bob Pratt filed the FOIA because they didn't care what the government was going to charge him for the search fees. So they come back and say, classified, national security, we can't talk about this, we're not going to comment or whatever. And so Bob gives up, and then they give it to a guy by the name of Todd Zeckel, I believe Todd Zeckel had. He ran CAUSE, which was the Citizens Against UFO Secrecy that sued the CIA in the 1980s for documents. And he was kind of a hardball guy. So they gave it to Todd, and Todd just phoned up NSA and he said, we want these documents, and if I don't get the documents, I'm phoning the Cuban embassy. And a couple hours later, the FBI showed up at his door and scared the living daylights out of him. And this went back to Stan, and Stan was protecting this guy's identity. And Stan was doing this by phone. Now, what I learned at the archives is that Stan taped his phone calls. So they're processing this material, all the audio, and there's a lot of audio video that Stan had. He had tapes from Merv Griffin in the 1960s on these big, huge, I don't even know how they're going to get this stuff off but they say they can process all this stuff and reproduce it. So they're doing all this kind of stuff. And so I'm going back to look for this Cuban thing. The other big thing that I had was I knew through Bill Moore in the 1980s, 1988, that and they provided me some extra material that Stan knew in 1983 that he was under investigation by the FBI. And this is before the MJ-12 document leaked. I guess that had to do with the Roswell crash. So they were under investigation, and Stan was asking the big skeptic Phil Klass, who worked for Aviation Week of Space Technology, talk to your buddies there and ask them why are we under investigation. And so Phil Klass tells them to file an FOA. They file an FOA, and both Stan and Bill Moore had their FBI files basically withheld. And Bill Moore had 61 pages, and there was only 55 pages that was withheld B1 national security exemption, totally withheld at the secret level. So the question is, if there's nothing to the UFO phenomena, why have you got some guy by the name of Bill Moore, who's a school teacher, who has 51 or whatever it was pages, B1 national security, totally exempt from any disclosure? And so Stan had the same thing. I talked to him in January before he died, and I said, Stan, your file was withheld as well. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, how many pages did we withhold? And he goes, I don't know. He wasn't very specific, but that was what I was looking for. And so we've recovered a lot of material on Stan from the FBI. And what you see is a lot of stuff, blanked out pages, which indicates Stan was onto something, that he had material. It validates the fact that UFOs are real. They're not going to, do a B1 national security exemption. I mean, if they're just making up documents or hoaxing or just, playing as a hobby UFO stuff. There's something to this. And the fact that these two major figures in 1980 basically could not get their FBI file proves that. So that's basically what it was. There's a lot of letters from people. I have to be very careful because they're going to allow me to produce all this stuff. Because I asked them, I said, well, are you putting this stuff on the website? And they said, no, you got to realize who we are. It's a provincial archives, and it's under taxpayer money. So provincial archives, like I say, state archives in states. But so basically what they have is a situation where they do birth certificates, death certificates, sale of property, church records, all this kind of stuff. They're not into UFOs. This is the first weird collection they've ever taken in their life. And Stan was not a Canadian citizen. So they had to really sell it to the archives to get the archives, because you got to consider, I mean, you got 3 full-time archivists for 4 years. That's a lot of money that they're throwing at this thing to do this. So they basically said, no, we're not set up for this. We're an archives that's into birth certificates, death certificates. We're not going to put this stuff online. Anybody wants to see this stuff, they got to come to New Brunswick to see it. So I sort of will put a lot of this stuff up. I have my White House UFO Facebook channel or site where I put quite a few documents there. So when I find something that's kind of interesting, I stick it up there, and I'm doing these PowerPoint presentations. I've done 4 of them already. I'm not sure whether they're out yet or not. I've done 4 of them. I've got 2 more that are set up. So for 40 minutes, I'll go through various documents on a PowerPoint presentation and point out these things. But there's really nothing explosive. I didn't expect anything explosive with Stan. In terms of, because he was pretty open about his stuff. There was one piece of metal that did come to him, and the guy said, here's the piece of the Roswell thing that I promised you, and it was in a little baggie, and I guess Stan didn't have time. It's like when you get really going, you haven't got time to do a lot of the stuff that comes to you. So Stan just stuck it in a file, and I immediately told the archives, I said, you better protect that piece of metal. Someone's going to walk in and just walk off of that thing. So now, in order to see that piece of metal, you have to have an archivist with you when you see this piece of metal. And the other thing that they showed was a photograph that was sent in 1984 of a photograph taken in 1982 of a field with a bunch of cows in it. And this was taken by a guy from a TV station. And part of the negative was sent to Stan, and it shows, I think there's 7 UFOs over the cows. And they're clear. They're as clear as day. They look exactly like the classic flying saucer. And so there's these kind of weird photographs. A lot of that stuff I'm going to have to go through one at a time, because he could receive piles and piles and piles and piles of letters from average people on the street. Here's my story. You did a great job. This kind of stuff. And that's the kind of stuff where they're going to be very protective, where I'm not allowed to really put the person's name out, because it's sort of personal stuff. So I have to really watch what I release from the archives. I got to make sure that I don't, step over the line, because if they cut me off, then it's game over. But I'll have to go back probably every 6 months for a couple of years to go through all this stuff. And it's not really something I'm really interested in. It's just I'm fascinated. It's like King Tut's tomb, that you can go in there and you may find something that is just explosive that nobody's ever seen before. Almost like with the, if you're familiar, I was dragged into this whole thing with the Edgar Mitchell documents, with the alien autopsy document and the Wilson document. I mean, that's the basic what happens. That's what I do. I go to collections where people die, and I go through the files. And every UFO researcher's got a story that someone came and told them and said, don't tell anybody, and they put it in a file, and it's sitting in that file waiting for me to go there and find it.
You mentioned earlier that our government doesn't know as much as many researchers would like to say and think. And it makes me think that some of these whistleblowers, you know, like you hear the stories of Corey Good and some of these others that claim to have been to Mars and all these jump rooms and this amazing technology. So I imagine that we don't have any of this, and they're just, I guess, spinning stories. You know, do we have a secret space program of sorts at all?
Well, that's my whole thing. Because I stayed away from those guys. I just said, you know, it's impossible to verify what they're saying. And so that's when I saw this thing with the two pieces of metal. That if you got Eric Davis, who's like, you know, hell put off, the guy that ran the ATIP thing, the main contractor for ATIP. This guy is arguing with Jacques Vallee, and they're arguing about levitating this piece of metal. The other one is Joe Firmage. I was involved with Joe Firmage, and I had the question put to Joe Firmage. Joe Firmage has spent, depending what figure you got, between $20 and $95 million. And there's this big lawsuit that's going on now with Bob Kiviat over this thing. But so he spent all this money on this gyro thing. He's got these opposite gyros, and they're spinning, and he believes he was given this sort of idea by this being that came in his room and stuff. And he ran US West. He was, you know, running a multi-billion-dollar computer company, and he suddenly gets in the UFO thing. He's trying to levitate this thing off the table. He's not getting anywhere either. And so I asked the question to Joe Firmage. I had the question put to him, well, Joe, does the Black Ops have the technology? And he said, no, they don't. And this is the whole point. Like, why would this multi-millionaire guy spend up to $95 million trying to levitate something off the table if he can just go into the black world and buy it for whatever, or at least get on the right track of getting to know that he's on the wrong track, that there is material, and try to figure out where that material is. And everywhere I went, it was the same with when Eric Davis, who worked the contract, said they shut down the crash saucer program in 1989 because they couldn't figure it out. And every 7 or 8 years, and I think George Knapp has indicated this as well, every 7 or 8 years they pull it off the shelf and say, nah, still can't figure it out, and put it back on the shelf again. That you get stuff. Or I heard the story, Richard Doty, when I interviewed him, said that they would bring pieces of the craft. So they have crafts, yeah, they have crafts in their body. They have at least one body. And so they would bring pieces of the craft to Hal Puthoff and say, can you figure this thing out? And Hal would look at this piece of the craft, and he didn't know what it was for or what it did or whatever. And so again, there you have an indication that they really don't know. Hal's been working on this since 1970, and he's got very high level security clearance. And yet you see, when you go to the experiencer, if you look at the MILAB material, when the Black Ops people grab the people out of their rooms and drug them and bring them in and say, what the aliens tell you and what's going on, they give the person a piece of the craft, the same as they do to Hal Puthoff, and they say, can you make this work? And of course the person can make it do whatever it's supposed to do. And then they apparently the word is, we got another one. And they know this is a legitimate experiencer that can make the craft work. It's this consciousness thing. You need the person. Like 14% of all experiencers say they've flown the craft, and everybody ignores this. And I'm saying, you know, when people are flying the craft, maybe we should pay attention to what they're saying, and they'll always talk about this consciousness thing. So one of the things that does sort of fit, that I'll tell you the story, is I had a meeting. This is 2013. I have a meeting with a bunch of rich guys in a cabin in Pennsylvania, and one of the guys that was there was a guy's, he's known as Tyler D. If you're familiar with the American Cosmic, Diane Pasulka's book. And Kit Green has said, if you want to know what he knows after working on this whole UFO thing, the weird desk at the CIA since the 1970s. You want to know what's going on? He says, take off the first couple of chapters of Diane Pasulka's book, the last couple of chapters, read the middle. That's what I think may be going on, if I'm right. So in this book, she talks about this Tyler D guy, who's a NASA engineer. I know who he is because he was at this meeting. So I've had a couple of meetings with this guy, and we're in this cabin, and he's talking to me about experiences. And this is what I'm saying. You've got to go to the experiences. You've got to talk to people who have been in the craft, who have interacted with the beings. So he had an experience. He said, I got these two women, and they fill out like manuals for him, like their their precognitive events, what they're seeing in the future, all this kind of stuff, and they're logging all things that are happening to them. And he's watching them because that's what you do. You watch the people who are interacting with the phenomena. So he had one girl who was sort of very close to me. He said, I think Connie lives really near you. And I said, really, where? And she said, Steinbach. I said, well, man, that's 30 miles from my house. So I talked to this Connie, and she tells me she's interacting with this Tyler D guy. So anyway, he's at this cottage. And here's one of the ones where they may have some technology. Because I always talk about Ron Pandolfi keeps talking about this portal technology. So again, you're in the situation where I say if they're talking nuts and bolts, they don't know what's going on. But if they start talking about portals and consciousness, I watch it very carefully. Even though they may not have this, they're at least in the right ballpark. They're talking the right type of thing. That you're coming in and out of something. You're popping through from one place to another. And they're not flying. They're coming through these portal wormholes, whatever you want to call them. So anyway, so Ron Pandolfi's talking about this at CIA, and there's all these firmages, supposedly there was connection of him to portals. So anyway, I'm in this, he tells me, this Tyler D tells me about these two girls. He phones up the one, he can't get a hold of her. Then he phones up and I talk to the other girl. And then he's sitting there and he's got his cell phone. And he says, what do you think of this? And he shows me this photograph. So now I sort of know who this guy is. Shows me this photograph. Well, anyway, he had a company. Let me give you a prelude before I get to this. He has a big company. He gets this invention. He has a being. He has this idea that comes in his head. And if you read the book, it ends up at the Pentagon. He gets pulled into the Pentagon. This general yelling and screaming. Who came up with this idea? Tyler D tells me, he said, you know, that idea, that came into my head in the morning when I woke up. He said, the last thing I remember the night before was a hooded figure standing at the end of the bed. So this is the prelude. I know that some people go, wow, this guy's a pretty cool guy. I mean, he told me he was working at NASA and all this kind of stuff. And that he got this thing put on the space shuttle and they would block in it. And he managed to get somebody to sign off and stuff like that. And he pulls his cell phone out and he shows me this photo. And it looks like these two guys flying through space. And they look like they're in the pajamas. And the one guy's older than the other guy, has no signature as to who painted it. And he said, so what do you think of this? And I'm looking at it, I go, oh, that's pretty weird. I don't know what he's talking about. And then he flips the next one, and it's a picture. It's a painting of these balls all going into the middle. There's big balls going into these smaller balls into the middle. Then there's a painting of an eclipse, the stages of an eclipse. Shows me that photo. And I'm going like, what the heck's this guy doing? He's showing me, and then he shows me these sort of screens on the side of a building where there's these space scenes of outer space and stuff like that. And then he says, you know where this is? And I says, no. He says, this is the old Hughes Aircraft Building on 999 Sepulveda Avenue in L.A. And I go, yeah, okay, whatever. And he says, that's the jump room. And I go, what? What? And so then he shows me them again. And he says, you know where this one with the two guys flying through space? He says, you know where that is? And I said, no. He says, it's right outside the elevator. And I'm going, really? And then he shows me, then he goes to the next photo and he shows me this 56, 57 Chev that's on top of this parkade that's attached to the building. And he says, look at the back seat there. He says, look, there's a postcard there. And you can see the postcard. And so then he says, he tells me this postcard's about like time travel. It's like some guy's in Spain, France, and he wishes he could travel through time and space to be with his girlfriend in America or something like that. I go, really? That was on the postcard. I was like, wow, this is like bizarre. And he said, well, if you go to it, he says, make sure the security guard, make sure you don't, he doesn't see you when you're photographing these paintings in this lobby thing. And it's a Hughes Aircraft Building was where this jump room was supposed to be on the 5th floor. It went up to the 5th floor, and then Barack Obama and all these guys went to Mars or whatever. It's just hokey story. But anyway, he says right outside the elevator, and I'm going, wow. So the first time I get to go to LA, I get off LAX and man, I forget I'm going to this place, and I go there and the security guard, and here's these paintings, just as Tyler D had showed me. The only thing that wasn't there was the 56 Chev up on top of the parkade. But when I saw that, like, he just sort of showed it to me and said, so what do you think about this? So I actually contacted Andy Basiago, and I said, Andy, there's two buildings. Is the jump room in the first building or the second building? He said, I was pretty young at the time. I don't remember which was the front or the back building. But when I saw that, and coming from Tyler D, I'm thinking, man, there's got to be something to this, because Tyler, he wouldn't have showed me that. He just showed, and he didn't really make any claim that it was true or not clue. He just said, what do you think of these? And just sort of really got my curiosity going. So the thing with the portal thing, I think there may be something in terms of portal technology that they're working on. But in terms of, the idea that they've got 1 mile long inner gravity crafts that are flying around, and that's was put out, this old 94-year-old guy was putting it out. And one of the documents I got years ago, I got the Douglas aircraft documents that were leaked to me. A guy died. He was doing the regressions. It's what you do. If you're doing a study, they did a $500,000 study at Douglas aircraft in the 1960s on flying saucers. And what you do is you bring a regressionist and you get people who've been on the ship and you regress them and say, did they tell you how the flying saucer works? That's what you do. You don't forget the UFO photographs and all that nonsense. You go to the people who are interacting. So I got these documents, and they basically ran it for 2 years. They spent $500,000 and then shut it down because they didn't get anywhere. So then suddenly this, I never think of the guy's name, this 94-year-old guy comes out with this book and says Douglas aircraft was flying these things in the 1950s and they're going to other planets and stuff. So I've contacted Bob Wood and I said, Bob, you were running this Douglas aircraft study in the 1960s and you're helping this guy write this book. And you got all this technology, mile-long anti-gravity crafts in the 1950s. And so why would James Douglas give you $500,000 in 1967, 1968, and you didn't discover anything? Like, this does not make sense, Bob. I mean, if you had the technology, why would you run a program in the 1960s and then come out to the conclusion you couldn't figure out anything? He said, I didn't have a security clearance, which didn't mean anything to me. I haven't, still blows me away that you can have those two positions. That we had all the crafts in the 1950s and we were flying to different star systems, and the aliens were walking around with thongs on and all this nonsense he put out. And yet in the 1960s, we know for it, because I got all the documents and I put them on a British website. Nobody looks at them because, people are on to whatever. I put these documents, they're all there, 100, 280 pages of Douglas aircraft, spent $500,000, had all these engineers and tried to figure out the UFO thing, and they couldn't figure it out. And the more I look, I recovered another one from a study done by President Johnson, an eyes-only study on UFOs, same time period, 1967, 68. Manuscript, the guy was in charge of the project, was writing a manuscript and died as he was writing the manuscript. I got all that material. They knew nothing either. It's the same thing. We know UFOs exist. We've got photographs. We've got evidence that something is interacting with us. But beyond that, it's pretty much a no-go, that we have no idea as to how this thing actually operates. And I've seen it over and over again on these various things. And the Johnson papers I've not released. A lot of the stuff I've got, the stuff I put on, the Douglas aircraft I put on in Britain, nobody's looked at that stuff. So all this stuff is out there that shows these major studies that were done that shows no threat to national security. We don't know what's going on, but yeah, there's a phenomenon. Yes, this is for real. There's stuff going on.
Now, with everything going on, the way things are progressing, do you think that in the future, in our lifetimes, that we will ever see possible open contact with these beings again?
We've got open contact now. There are people just are ignoring the people who've got the open contact. There are people who have, can basically bring them in, I guess, as you could say, or you get these cross indexes. The way I think the way you have to realize is that things are eternal. Things go on forever, and that it's really got nothing to do with an end game. It's got to do with raising consciousness of the world. And you see the consciousness of the world's actually going the opposite direction right now in terms of separation, me versus you. Everybody's, fighting, and the left brain is running the show in most cases. So the open contact, they have the open contact with certain people, but in terms of, they're really not interested in the major, what people think, like landing on the White House lawn, because you can't do your kids' homework for them. You have to let people figure it out. That's why I got in this thing about the theory of wow. So instead of, because both the government and the aliens are in the same situation, if they're aliens, whoever they are, they're both in the same situation. The government is not covering up. If the government wanted to cover up, it would do what the Canadian government has done since 1967. Just shut up and quit talking about it. The Canadian government, people ask me, what's the Canadian government doing? I haven't got the foggiest notion what the Canadian government is doing, because they don't talk about it. When you're talking about it, you're not covering up. So the government is not covering up, but they're not disclosing either, because if they wanted to disclose, they would stand up the CIA director and the president and just put it all on the table. They're not doing that. So they're doing something in between. That's this gradual, slow dip disclosure. They're doing something in between. They're not disclosing. They're not covering up. The beings are doing exactly the same thing. If the beings wanted us to know what was going on, they could land on the White House lawn and make an announcement and tell us what's going on. Or they could take over the TV. They did that in 1976, the Colin Andrews story. They took over the TV for 6 minutes and they put out a message. So they can do that anytime they want. They're not. The idea is not to give us the stuff. The idea is to do the wow thing, is to make you go, what the heck was that? Look at my PowerPoint presentation. Like, what is going on here? And it's like, whoa, somebody's playing around here. And then you start to sit there and you try to figure it out and you go like, what's going on? And they want us to figure it out. They want us to, because when you come to conclusion as to what's going on, then it's solid. But you can't go in and do your kids' homework. So the beings are doing the same thing. They're not, if they wanted to cover up, they could turn the lights off on the craft. When they abduct somebody, if that's what's going on, nobody sees them abducting people. So if they want to cloak themselves, they can turn the lights off and nobody's going to see them. They have lights on so that people can see them. They take a heart out of a cow without making an incision, an 9 by 11 inch heart out of a cow without an incision, because they want you to go, what the hell is going on? How did they do that? And I say to Linda, how? Like, Linda, why are cattle mutilations bloodless? Because if they weren't bloodless, nobody would investigate them. They want it to be really, really weird. Or the crop circles. Like, how did they do that? How could you make that big a crop circle in one night? That's just unbelievable. And that's what they're doing. They're doing this wow thing where they're making you go, what the heck? And it's this gradual thing where what life is all about. We see it as, like Americans and Canadians, we see it as endpoint. Okay, when are they going to get down to landing on the damn White House lawn and giving us the free energy so I can put it in my SUV and drive for free? It's like we're into toys, we're into material things. And it's not. It's about learning lessons. And even if we destroy the world, we will learn our lessons because we keep coming back. So what they're doing is not giving us stuff, which we think. There is no Messiah. There is no Santa Claus, whether that's a politician or whether that's an alien. There's no Messiah. There's no Santa Claus. They're not here to give us stuff. They're here to wake us up. And it's to sort of jog us, to make us, think about this kind of stuff and to learn our lessons. They can't come in, because if they come in, you don't learn the lesson. It's basically, they're doing the same slow drip disclosure where they're trying to get you to figure it out for yourself. And I've gotten there, and you see more and more people since 2012 have gone down the consciousness road. They're starting to look at this thing and saying, well, maybe we got this wrong. And my lectures now, I point out all the stuff you think is right is basically wrong. We used to believe the world was flat, and we believe the sun ran around the earth, and we believe there's 5,000 stars, and that's, you see the star is where it is, and actually it's 1,000 light years away. So you're looking at the light from 1,000 light years away. And the fact that when Einstein developed the theory of relativity, they all believed there was only one galaxy. And it's this kind of stuff where you start going through all this stuff, and everybody says, oh, the universe, there's no time and space, but the universe began 13.7 billion years ago. I go, something's wrong with that. Either there's no time and space, or there's a big bang. And so now the big bang is different. Now the latest thing is, oh, we made a mistake. It's 11.4. Or there's 200 trillion galaxies, or 200 billion galaxies. And then suddenly in the last year, they suddenly go, whoops, we made a mistake. It's actually 2 trillion. We're only out by 1,000%. And we just sort of, as we go along, The more we go along, the more we realize we've got it totally messed up and that we're missing the boat as to what's going on. And that's why we can't figure out the UFO thing, because we've got all the basic assumptions wrong. We're believing it's separate from us. We're believing it's nuts and bolts. We're believing all this nonsense that we've got in our heads. And that's what they're trying to do, is gradually change our perception as to how does the world work. And that's why I say, if you understand what's behind the UFO phenomena, you realize you are playing in the Super Bowl of all stories. This is about reality. This is about how the world works. It's not so much just aliens coming here to entertain us, to give us stuff. It's part of reality. We're realizing reality is more than what we thought it was.
I agree 100%. And thank you so much, Mr. Cameron, for coming on tonight. That was fascinating information. I still have 2 pages of questions that we could have gotten to, so I'm going to have you back on in the future.
Thanks. I appreciate it. And let's do it again sometime.